The winters are brutal here. Even though I live in the city, just about every night, someone freezes to death. A good chunk of those throwing boiling water and watching it freeze videos are from here. Even if the sun is out, it still hurts to breathe. When the sun goes down, it hurts to exist. As soon as it gets dark, Fahrenheit and Celsius slam into each other in a horrid marriage of -40 degrees. The air turns into crystallized pain. No one walks slowly after sundown. He was staring at the rusted wheelchair ramp of my housing block, shivering beneath a pile of rags. I had forgotten one of my gloves at work, and the overfilled plastic bags I was carrying were cutting into my swollen hands. I was worried about losing my fingers, but I knew I couldn't live with myself if I let an old man freeze to death. "Hi, mister. I don't think we've met. I'm Alexei. Can I help you up this ramp?" "Stay away. I have nothing to give you." "Oh, I don't want anything from you, mister. We just hate to see a new neighbor freeze to death. So, how about it? Can I help you up this ramp?" No response. Too proud to ask for help. Yet, when I grabbed the handles of his wheelchair, he didn't resist. He just grumbled. I'm pretty apt with wheelchairs and strollers, and it wasn't the first time that I forgot my gloves at work. But pushing the old man up the ramp was harder than it should have been. While we waited for the elevator to come, I made a quick note to talk to the building manager about the rusty ramp. "Which floor will it be, mister?" Out of his rags, the man produced a crumbled piece of stained paper. He tried to make sense of the handwriting. "Ah, floor 7. Looks like we're neighbors." "Yes, 7th floor." The elevator creaked and groaned with its usual strains and dragged us up towards the roof of the complex. With the stinging pain fading from my eyes, I got a chance to look at the stranger. White hair with the consistency of spiderweb, skin and bone and stubble, a discomforting amount of swelling over his right eye. "So, Mr. New Neighbor, are you around these parts?" "No." "Are you from here?" "No." "I'm born and raised right here in this winter wonderland. Quick tip, don't ever turn that radiator knob lower than the maximum. It's a nice little home that we have here, but the heating system is back from the Soviet days. Tends to leak as soon as you tamper with it. And boy oh boy, are those things no fun to fix." No response. I was used to old folks being suspicious and quiet, but from my experience, once you talk for a bit, they tend to open up. My new neighbor wasn't like the other old-timers I've met. All that kept us company for the elevator ride was the choking and coughing of metal. "Here we are, 7th floor." He passed me the keys. They were covered in rust, but they fit the door. A stove, a bed, a window, the bare minimum for survival. All the Soviet-built housing projects have a sort of melancholy about them, but there was something especially desperate about that cramped room. An aura of dread and mildew flowed through the air. Then again, that could have just been the old man. As soon as I opened the door, my new neighbor wheeled himself to the window. "Well, like I said before, my name is Alexei. Nice to meet you." The old man didn't turn away from the window. Outside, the world was still. Nothing but a collection of snow-covered panel housing and flickering lamplight. "I, work in a supermarket, and they let me take food that's past its due date. There's nothing wrong with the food, just can't be sold. Would be ashamed to see it go to waste, so I bring it back to the folk over here. Quite a big haul today. Lots of beans. Would you like—" "I have nothing to give in return. Leave me. I've not come here to make friends. I've come here to die." I left the man 2 cans of beans on the stove. The weather was significantly kinder in the morning. Having a day off from work, I went to talk to the building manager about the ramp. We still had to wear scarves around our faces, but the icicles on the railing were starting to melt. As we cleared the ramp, we spoke of spring. Above my unit lives a single mother with a particularly noisy, yet adorable infant. When she saw the newly cleaned ramp, she was ecstatic. All of a sudden, the daily struggle of getting the carriage inside of the apartment complex was gone. It felt nice to know I'd managed to improve her life, if only just a little bit. Yet, she was not the neighbour who I was most concerned about. The mailbox for the old man's unit didn't have a name on it. Neither did his door. When I rang the doorbell, there was no answer. I pressed down on the bell for a bit, just in case the old man's hearing was bad. After about 30 seconds, he acknowledged me. "If you're here to rob me, I have nothing." "Not here to rob you, mister. It's me, Alexei, your neighbour. I've brought you more food." No response, but the door wasn't locked. He sat facing his window, just where I'd left him. The cans of beans, however, were empty. "Me and the building manager cleaned the ramp. Should have no troubles going up and down on your own. If you ever want company for a walk, though, I'd be more than happy to join you." "Why?" "Walks with strangers are pretty fun. The neighbourhood is a lot of concrete, but I think it has a certain charm to it. There's an abandoned hotel nearby where students get together and play jazz from time to time. Once it warms up, I'll be happy to take... Why do you help me?" That dread, that sense of discomfort was still in the air, but it wasn't as prominent as the evening prior. With the sun shining and the laughter of children echoing from the housing projects, the world seemed a bit more welcoming. Why do I help you? Because it's the right thing to do. God knows we have to help each other. It's a cold world out there. An aspiring saint. Helping those in need makes you feel powerful. It makes you feel special. I don't think I'm special, mister. I just like to help. I think most people are like that. His wheelchair creaked like nails on a chalkboard as he turned around to face me. His sunken eyes regarded me as if I were a maniac. Something had changed in his face from the day prior, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Most people want to help. Are you truly so naive as to believe in the goodness of mankind? What of the wars? What of the orchestrated famines? What of the men who forced Mayday parades through clouds of radiation? I shrugged. I try not to think about that. Don't see much of a point in it, mister. The Soviets are in the past. If we all work together, we can build a better world. The swelling that once existed beneath his right eye had now moved to the left, leaving behind dark, diseased skin. If you were to witness what I've witnessed, you would know how foolish you sound right now. All your thoughts of human goodness and charity dissipate in the face of reality. Man cannot rule over man. Staying in power requires an iron grip, and that grip, that cursed strangle of rule, will squeeze any semblance of humanity out of the ruler. If you would have seen what I've seen, you would know that no amount of charity can save us. What have you seen, mister? Makarov, Dr. Konstantin Makarov. The swelling around his left eye pulsed, causing him to grit his remaining teeth. The man had introduced himself as a doctor, but he clearly needed to go to the hospital. I was about to offer to take him to the nearby clinic, but before I had a chance to offer my help, he spoke once more. I have seen unspeakable horrors processed through flawed human systems. I've seen good men fall into despair in the face of this horrid reality that swirls beneath the facade of stability. My name is Konstantin Makarov, and I've worked... The children outside went silent. The lights in the apartment flickered in the same way they did before the blackouts of the 90s. The swollen flesh on Makarov's face throbbed as if it was trying to reach past his skin. My name is Konstantin Makarov, and I've worked as a chief scientist in Illinois. Saying the words clearly drained the man, yet for all the weaknesses in his voice, the throbbing of swollen flesh on his forehead strengthened. With each shivering pulse, it seemed as if the infected skin was about to force its way out of its skull. I immediately grew worried for the old man. Dr. Makarov, your face. May I take you to the clinic? I have a friend there. I'm sure he would happily inspect you for free. The growth on your face looks... No. The rapid heartbeat in the old man's face died down. With a screech of rusted iron, he turned back around to the window. Down below, the neighborhood children were riding old plastic bags down a snowy hill. Please, just leave me be. I've not come here to be a charity case. I've come here to die. I thought of saying something, but I didn't. Instead, I just left the man another can of beans in the stove. The structure was said to be hidden in the forest that neighboured our housing projects. In educated circles, the structure was known as the building formerly known as the United People's Institution of Science. Around campfires in the village pubs, it was known as Illinois Deli. When I was young, my uncle used to tell us stories about it. He described the place as an old Soviet science facility that dabbled in knowledge beyond the scope of human understanding. He spoke of monsters and curses and forbidden knowledge. I listened to his stories in rapt attention, but even as a child, I considered them to be fiction. As an adult, I considered it to be the byproduct of our collective imagination, a way to explain away the 60 years of harsh Soviet rule. After talking to Makarov, I wasn't so sure. The man was old, but he was not mad. Illinois existed, and he worked within its confines at some point. That was not what kept sleep away from me that night. It was the old man's eyes that convinced me that not only was that place real, but that at least some of the stories I heard about it were true. There was no doubt in my mind that Makarov had seen something unearthly in his previous work. The whole night through, all I could think of was that throbbing mass of flesh stemming from his skull. I spent most of my morning thinking about it too. I tried to figure out the source of the injuries, the way that something so discomforting could manifest. Yet all I found was pained empathy. Thoughts of swollen flesh followed me to my morning shift, where they metastasized into a burning migraine. By the time I got back home, I could barely think straight. I put aside the leftover groceries for later and settled down on the couch for a nap. I thought that after a bit of rest, I could go hand out the leftover food and check on Makarov. Yet sleep refused to come. Instead, I laid on the couch with stinging pain in my head and nausea rolling around in my stomach. There was tenseness in the air, like the kind that festers up when a fight is about to happen. I lay there, sick and anticipating something I couldn't put my finger on. Bzzzt. I came to the door before I had a chance to press the buzzer twice. Makarov's strange growth had shifted once more. Now it was sitting in between his eyes, making his face look like a highwayman mask made of bruises. Alexei, I'm not long for this world. I appreciate your help throughout my short time here, but there is one more favor I could ask of you. Seeing the poor Frau man dragged all of my attention away from the migraine. Of course, Dr. Makarov. How can I be of help? Take me to the roof. The roof? I don't think it's very safe there. You could easily... He looked sicker than before. Much sicker than before. A reason for why he would want to take me to the roof immediately struck me. I'm not looking to jump, if that's what you're thinking. No, Alexei. I merely want to see the sunset one last time. I fear my body will not make it through the night. I can take you to the clinic. Surely they can help you there. I'm much more qualified than any doctor at any clinic in this provincial town. I know the nature of my injuries, and I've made peace with them. Now please, neighbour, would you help me make my way to the roof? Beyond us stretched an infinitely repeating collection of cement colosseums. Below us, in the centre of each of the circular panel houses, children played. Their laughter echoed below us, a reminder of joy in a sea of brutalist architecture. See, Doctor, doesn't the neighbourhood have a charm about it? The old man was completely deaf to my attempts at small talk. He just stared into the steadily reddening sky, lost in his own thoughts. I've been part of something horrible. What do you mean, Doctor? I've been part of something horrible, and for decades I've stayed silent. I believe that what I did was for the greater good. I believed my work at the facility would usher in a new era of humanity. I believed that what I partook in was a necessary evil. But now that I sit here, Now that all is done, I always had doubts. On a primal level, I knew that I was doing something wrong, but I've always denied myself the clarity of thought. The mass of flesh beneath his forehead started to pulse harder than it ever had before. Even past his bruises, the old man's skin was turning the colour of the setting sun. The growth on his forehead was completely foreign to me, but the look in his eyes was familiar. In my younger years, I volunteered at a hospice. Konstantin Makarov had the same look in his eyes of the soldiers brought back from the war. He had done something horrid and needed a chance to confess. I would not rob him of that right. "What have you done, Dr. Makarov?" A sharp wind drowned out the children below. The light started to seep out of the sky. With each moment that passed, the mass of flesh on Makarov's forehead grew more frenzied. The old man's speech came through choked gasps, yet he refused to give up. Parasite. When I worked at the United People's Institute of Science, I was tasked with the study of a parasite found in the nearby steppe. Profoundly fascinating organism capable of communication with other members of its species across the world. Indestructible, highly intelligent, physically decentralized. The more the organism grew, the closer it was to its descendants, the more dangerous it became. Yet, the scientific potential of this organism was limitless. I kept on telling myself all that was needed was more research. I kept on telling myself that the parasite's potential could be harnessed for the good of humanity. The pursuit of knowledge blinded me. It made me skip safety protocols. It made me reckless with my own flesh. The Soviets were not the only superpower in possession of the parasite. Across the Iron Curtain, a certain Dr. Groves was enlisted by the Americans to study the... We communicated. Markov's entire body had flared up with that red pulse of flesh. Puffs of steam rose like a boiling kettle from beneath his scarf. "Take your time, Doctor. Take a deep breath. I'm here to listen without judgment. Tell me what you need to get off your shoulders." With a deep, shivering groan, he continued. Chaos. When the satellite states started to fight for their independence, when the walls started to crumble, there was chaos. Groves and me used this chaos to transport the Western breed of the organism. The Soviet Union was doomed to fail. The People's Institute of Science was doomed to fail. Yet, with the Western breed of the organism, all of that would be irrelevant. The day the package arrived, the day the two halves combined into a greater whole, that was the end of the United People's Institute of Science. That was the day Eleanor Deri was born. For years, research continued under the parasite's leadership. We were making progress. We were gaining valuable information for the good of mankind, but the military, they left us alone for years. But once they realized the power that we held, I sacrificed my body to science. I sacrificed my body to the parasite to keep the institute safe. The military incursion was taken care of quickly. They stood no match against. They were not prepared. They couldn't be. But my body, the parasite, it refused to give back control. It used me to feed. Above us, the stars painted a chaotic galaxy. The streets had gone silent. It was far too cold to be outside. Even past my thick gloves, I could feel my fingers going numb. Yet I knew that the shaking man in the wheelchair needed to speak. It used me. It used me to hunt, to feed, to grow, to spread. "Dr. Markov, you're shaking. It's freezing. Please, let me take you to the clinic. Or, if not that, let me at least take you back downstairs. You're not well." "You can leave if you need to, but I cannot go yet. It hasn't happened yet." "What hasn't happened?" "The organism. It grew inside of me. It fed and killed and grew, and when my body could no longer hold it, it spread." "Where did it spread to?" The old man didn't respond. He simply sighed. The throbbing beneath his flesh was starting to calm. The look of tortured guilt in his eyes simmered down to resigned acceptance. Alexei, do you truly believe in the goodness of mankind? Yes. He sat in silence, his skin growing paler by the second. I guess it doesn't matter anymore. What's done is done. Thank you for all of your help. May you one day find forgiveness in your heart for what I have done. We all make mistakes, Dr. Markarov. It's part of being human. Everyone deserves forgiveness. I don't. An explosion cracked the silent night in half. The housing projects lit up in the twin flames of rockets rising from the forest. The projectiles moved with dizzying speed towards the sky. As freezing as it was outside, a flurry of windows opened beneath us to see what was happening. Did those rockets come from the facility? The old man did not respond. He simply watched. Even past the diseased bruising on his face, I could see tears gathering at the edges of his eyes. The parasite spread throughout my body until it could be contained no more. Now it was spread much further. The rockets flew higher and higher, making their incursion on the starry sky. It wasn't until the sound of the thrusters had completely disappeared that they changed their trajectory. Each went in a different direction, drawing a line of white smoke through the black sky, growing smaller and smaller until... poof. Two tiny, silent explosions in the sky rained down bits of fiery debris all over the earth. Dr. Markarov, is that where the parasite spread? To the rockets? The old man did not reply. He was no longer shivering. His skin was bloodless. The winters are brutal here. Even though I live in the city, just about every night, someone freezes to death. A good chunk of those throwing boiling water and watching it freeze videos are from here. Even if the sun is out, it still hurts to breathe. When the sun goes down, it hurts to exist. As soon as it gets dark, Fahrenheit and Celsius slam into each other in a horrid marriage of -40 degrees. The air turns into crystallized pain. No one walks slowly after sundown. He was staring at the rusted wheelchair ramp of my housing block, shivering beneath a pile of rags. I had forgotten one of my gloves at work, and the overfilled plastic bags I was carrying were cutting into my swollen hands. I was worried about losing my fingers, but I knew I couldn't live with myself if I let an old man freeze to death. Hi, mister. I don't think we've met. I'm Alexei. Can I help you up this ramp? Stay away. I have nothing to give you. Oh, I don't want anything from you, mister. We just hate to see a new neighbor freeze to death. So, how about it? Can I help you up this ramp? No response. Too proud to ask for help. Yet, when I grabbed the handles of his wheelchair, he didn't resist. He just grumbled. I'm pretty apt with wheelchairs and strollers, and it wasn't the first time that I forgot my gloves at work. But pushing the old man up the ramp was harder than it should have been. While we waited for the elevator to come, I made a quick note to talk to the building manager about the rusty ramp. Which floor will it be, mister? Out of his rags, the man produced a crumbled piece of stained paper. He tried to make sense of the handwriting. Ah, floor 7. Looks like we're neighbors. Yes, 7th floor. The elevator creaked and groaned with its usual strains and dragged us up towards the roof of the complex. With the stinging pain fading from my eyes, I got a chance to look at the stranger. White hair with the consistency of spiderweb, skin and bone and stubble, a discomforting amount of... Every year around this time, I used to go on holiday. I was not looking for winter sun or peace and quiet. I was looking for the end of the world. This was a particular interest of mine, which began in 1999. I was working in IT and had been caught up in a wave of speculation called Y2K. As I'm sure you know, due to the way computer programs have been written, there was a widespread fear that when we reached the new millennium, The machines which already ran so much of our lives would interpret the date as being the 1st of January 1900. Chaos would ensue. Hand on heart, whether there really was a problem in the first place or not, I'm still not sure. I had my doubts back then, but kept them to myself. I was not going to bite the corporate hand that fed me. And, in the end, power plants did not explode and planes did not fall out of the sky. The world woke up on New Year's Day, as it always had, with hangovers and vows to join a gym. I started the year 2000 with a very healthy bank balance. For months, I'd been working all hours on solutions to the glitch and being paid extremely well for it. I was, though, feeling pretty disillusioned with computing. I had seen the future as increasingly led by ever more sophisticated technology. But, as winter bit that January, I sat in my apartment and decided I wanted to walk away from the career ladder. I invested the money I'd earned very carefully and lived frugally, taking on consultancy gigs now and then to top up my savings. My one extravagance was my annual jaunt in search of the apocalypse. The spark which lit this eccentric fire was reading about 1900. Safely out of the other side of Y2K, I had wondered what life was really like back then. Was, I wondered, the world a much better place without computers? My research, however, took me in a totally unexpected direction. I already knew that 1999 was not the first time otherwise rational people thought civilization was coming to crash down around them. But I had not known just how many times throughout history that groups, or cults, or call them what you will, had figured that the world was coming to an end on a certain date. We're talking fire, brimstone, floods, all are coming to get you. As we all know, for obvious reasons, none of the prophecies had ever come true, leaving countless disappointed followers and red-faced leaders. Maybe I'm just a sucker for seeing people fail, but I could not get enough of this saga of good old-fashioned deceit, delusion and dismay, and I devoured book after book on the subject. I found there had been many varieties of the end of times as there are days in the year, but I was increasingly drawn to incidences where the final call came at midnight, as one year turned into another. I guess this was because of the memory of waiting nervously at my workstation as the clock ticked towards 12 in the last minutes of 1999. And, luckily for me, the end of the world at New Year continued to be a hot and very current topic, and I was able to indulge myself repeatedly. I stood on mountaintops as acolytes huddled close by, shivering in their underwear. I waded out to sea and waited alongside wailing grown men and women. I once squatted in a cave in total darkness. The only sign I was not alone was the occasional cough or the sound of someone breaking wind. Every single time, the world continued to turn, undestroyed, unjudged, and I returned home wondering where my next adventure should be. 12 months ago, I stepped off a train in the English countryside. The apocalypse was due near here in 2 days. It was also raining. I thought longingly for a moment about my hot tub at home, then pulled up the collar of my far too thin coat and set off walking. I tried to book a taxi in advance, but when I got to the part where I gave the name of my destination, an uncomfortable silence followed. 2 of the taxi outfits I tried then simply hung up. A third muttered, "We don't go there," and then left me listening to the disconnected tone. I was disappointed, but not surprised. The places I visited on my annual trips were usually shunned by everyday folk, or rather, the people who lived there were. Cults were not welcome neighbours. The group my research had led me to this time was somewhat of an enigma. I had first heard about them on an online forum where it was reported that they were inviting those who wished to seek refuge from a corrupt world to join them. A little more digging revealed that they were looking ahead to the end of times at the conclusion of the year. This was enough for me to book my flights. As I trudged along the road which narrowed into a path that soon descended into a line of mud across a field. I hoped the discomfort I felt would be worth it. It was 4 o'clock, and it was almost dark. The only light came from the torch on my phone, and another occupational hazard for my trips. No bars showed. I put my head down against the now driving rain and struggled on. An hour later, I had finally reached my destination. I was soaked to the skin, shattered, hungry, and in a foul mood. If I had been in one of the cottages that I was approaching, I would have not answered the door to the angry-looking, wet, mud-splattered man outside. I tapped at the door of one cottage, from which dim lights showed through the windows. By that stage, I did not care if whoever lived there was welcoming or hostile, crazy or sane. I just wanted to get warm and dry. I tapped harder. "Come on," I said under my breath, and was mightily relieved when the door swung open. A woman stood in the doorway, draped in darkness. I blinked, wiped rain from my eyes. "I seek refuge," I said. She looked at me. I tried and failed to read her expression. Long moments later, she spoke. "Welcome, traveller." Then she stepped aside and gestured with a hand that I should come in. Aware that I must be dripping water all over a floor, I entered and followed her into a room lit by candlelight. The candles must have been scented, and there was a very strong smell of lavender. There was also, I was pleased to see, a small coal fire, and I moved as close to it as I could, desperate for some heat. A drop of rain falling from my hair landed on the glowing coals and sizzled. The sound was embarrassingly loud in the otherwise silent room. I glanced nervously at the woman. Now we were inside, I could see she was young, barely in her 20s, and pretty. She wore a long, plain dress and black flat-heel boots. Her mousy brown hair was gathered up in a bun. "It is a foul night to be out," she said, and the smile lit up her face. "There's a pot of stew in the kitchen. I will fetch some through." I stood in my puddle of rainwater and grinned. After I had eaten 2 portions of the stew, a mix of root vegetables and a fatty meat, she showed me to a small room at the back of the cottage. The bed was made. I wished the woman good night, peeled off my still sodden clothes, and crawled under the covers. I was asleep the moment my head touched the pillow. I don't know how long I slept. There wasn't a clock in the room, and using the torch had run my mobile's battery low. Sitting up in bed, I looked around for a socket for my charger, but could see none. None of this was unexpected. Many of the groups I had encountered had rejected the trappings of the modern world, and this appeared to be the case here. I was also not perturbed by the fact that I was sleeping in a complete stranger's home, one whose name I didn't even know. She did not know mine either, or anything else about me, and yet seemed perfectly relaxed to have me there. I'd yet to have met a cult that turned a potential new member away, and as I dressed and set off in search of somewhere to clean my teeth, I was looking forward to experiencing the end of the world in the company of this woman and her companions. I was whistling merrily as I poked my head out into the corridor. The devil's music. It was not the young woman who had said this, but a man. He wore a dark pinstripe suit. It was faded and filthy, but not as filthy as his face, which was caked in dirt. I realized I was staring rudely and decided to do what the English do when in doubt in any situation. Apologize. "I'm sorry," I said. "The devil's not interested," he replied. "He's too busy singing along to the fetid tune you make." Whistling is a no then, I thought, and went full English. "I'm very sorry." Thankfully, at that moment, the young woman appeared. She was standing in the doorway, dressed as she had been the night before. But now in the daylight, I could see that she wore makeup, a white foundation over her face, and below her chin where it met the high neckline of her dress. This seemed somewhat incongruous with the plain, antiquated nature of her surroundings. I was thrown a little more when I noticed that her hands were also covered in foundation. Encountering the unexpected was one of the joys of my trips, but these small details troubled me. Staring again, I thought, and said, "Please excuse me, I did not mean to cause any offence." "You mean no harm," she replied. "My cousin has never travelled outside our little community and is not used to the ways of strangers. But let us not worry about such things. At the end of this day, we shall leave all such matters behind. So come, please, we must prepare." Saying this, she reached out and put a hand on mine. Her skin, under its unnatural white layer, was cold. I tensed at her touch, wished I had not when I saw the hurt in her eyes, hurt I'd caused with my reaction. "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it this time. She looked away and moved towards the front door, opened it and stepped outside. Feeling bad, I trailed after her. The man, her cousin, followed. I could not see him, but I could smell him. He stank. There were around 24 cottages gathered close together. I had only seen a handful the night before in the darkness. They were built of sturdy-looking stone and looked deserted, apart from one. Smoke rose from its chimney, and the young woman went up to the door. She did not knock, and it must not have been locked, because she went right in. The smell of lavender I'd noticed the night before drifted out of the open door as I waited for her. It was unpleasantly heavy, and I was relieved to be out in the fresh air where its effects were passing. I forgot all about this when the woman returned. She was leading an old woman by the hand. The old woman was blind. Where her eyes should have been, they were empty, dark spaces. As she was led closer, I saw that her skin was also covered in a layer of powdered white. "Grandmother," the young woman said, "we've been joined by a new soul seeking refuge." I tensed, anticipating that the old woman would touch my face, wondering if her fingers would be cold as well. But she only smiled and revealed blackened gums and yellowed teeth. I forced a smile in reply, then realized I was wasting my time. "Pleased to meet you," I said, still acting those British manners I thought, and watched as the cousin took the grandmother's other arm and the three of them set off walking. For the first time in my travels, I was seriously tempted to bail. These people were creeping me out. Then I gave myself a good talking to. I had not come all this way to go home whimpering with my tail between my legs. I hurried after them as the final dusk of the year began to fall. I realized, have slept well past noon. Midnight was much closer than I'd thought. Midnight and the end of the world. They had not gone far. I caught up with them in a little clearing just off the muddy path which I'd followed the day before. They were simply standing there, looking at peace with their lot. Waiting, I guessed, for the end of times they believed was imminent. I had 1,001 questions, and I could not help myself. "Do you believe the dead will rise?" I asked first. She turned to look at me and said quietly, "There is no need. The dead are already here." I studied her face, saw she was sincere, and saw dark patches under the makeup on her face, more on her hands. My mind began to race. What did she mean, the dead already here? What was wrong with her skin? And then I caught the scent rising off her. It was nauseating, the same smell I'd noticed from her cousin earlier. Only now I recognized it. It was the sickly, sweet smell of decay. I tried to speak, to ask her to explain, to bring reason back to a world which felt like it was beginning to spin around me. "Do not be afraid," she said. "This is our way. Our movement was founded 100 years ago by a wise man who turned his back on the science which had made his fortune. He renounced the world and came to us with a potion that he laid in the soil. That potion made the dead dance in their graves and fight their way free." As she spoke, fear rippled through my body. Her cousin, their grandmother, stood and listened. I could see now where the skin of their faces had blackened under their masks of makeup and dirt, felt the stench coming from them in waves. I tried to focus back on her words as she went on. "Now, when we die, we have no need of the bitter grave or the potion. The bite of the chosen ones is all we need. It brings us back, and we go on. We tend our homes, we say our prayers, we welcome newcomers into the fold." As she said this, they began to appear. They emerged from the nearby cottages. Some were dressed in rags, others in finery. Some were still decaying, and even in the depths of winter, delicate clouds of flies followed their every step. Some were little more than bone, and these sightless ones were led by those still with flesh enough. All chattered ceaselessly, teeth clacking, lipless mouths muttering, the remains of vocal cords and rotting tongues straining to be heard. I watched, transfixed. They were not like any cult I'd encountered before. They were a cult whose members were all, I could think of no other word, zombies. There was no need to clamber out of the ground, for these corpses come the apocalypse. They could just cut to the chase, and that is what they were doing, gathering slowly into a circle, getting ready to ascend when midnight came. And they wanted me to go with them. Horror engulfed me as I realized this, as a rusty blade was placed at my feet by one of the things. Another reached out and touched my throat with the dead flesh of its fingers, made a slicing motion, and then smiled, showing me its teeth. "Join us," it said. "Join us," the one who had given me the blade echoed. "Join us," others who began to chant. "Join us." The young woman came over to me. She placed her hands on my cheeks. The coldness of her burnt, and I began to cry. "Shh," she said. "Come with us. Be one of us." And then she kissed me. Her lips were dry, her breath rancid. I wept and tried to move away, but she held me tighter and began to press her body against mine. My temper flared at this. I pushed her, lashed out, and hit her in the face. Her rotted flesh gave way, and my hand sunk deeper inside her. Bile rose into my mouth, and I yanked my hand back out. A gaping hole remained. I could see the bones inside her, the maggots curling in dismay that their feast had been disturbed. I could take no more. I turned and ran. At midnight, I was still stumbling through the dark tangle of the countryside. In the distance, I heard fireworks. Some innocent celebration by those who had no idea the terror which dwelt so close. By dawn, I was on a train to the airport. I did not sleep during my long journey home. And now, I do not know if they ascended. I do not know if they returned to their homes to tend and pray once more, to welcome unsuspecting newcomers into their fold. I do not know if they think of me, if the young woman can still taste me as I can taste her. The memory of a kiss lingers. I do not think it'll ever go away. As for the future, I'm going to be in 2022, sitting in my hot tub, a bottle of bourbon in my hand. If the world does end, I want to be good and drunk. The little stone figure Mum kept in a bedside table scared me the first time I saw it. Man-like, but not quite human, it sat holding its knees to its chest and peeked out from behind them with shy eyes and an evil grin. It seemed to have no neck until Mum turned it around to show me its backside. Its neck was curled up along its spine like a twisted slinky with a head at the end. Dad stood in the corner watching us. When I made a scared face, he ran a reassuring hand down my back. "It's okay, son. It won't hurt you. We follow its rules." I hated looking at it, but every night Mum told me to kneel down and whisper the prayer that had burned itself into my imagination. "All our blood and bones belong to you. Lucky we who know that you are true. We do the things that others would not do." My mom taught me to say these words on my 5th birthday before I could even read or write. I would sit on my knees in a dark room with my hands cupped and stare at its open eyes, which I thought moved sometimes. I used to think it was just the trick of the light. The worship of Z required little from us. Whereas friends went to church and read the Bible, we kept the statue in the dark room and prayed once a day. We had nothing else to do for it. That year, my mum got pregnant with my little brother, and she expressed her gratitude one night by sobbing uncontrollably while praying. I had no idea back then, but Mom had been what the Bible calls barren, and doctors said her pregnancies were miracles. 8 months later, she gave birth to Jay at home, without a nurse, and I said my prayers as usual while she cut some of Jay's hair and set it down in front of Z's statue. My eyes searched hers for a reason she would do that, but her eyes avoided mine. While I prayed, I thought Z's eyes were staring at the tuft of baby hair. Not much changed in our lives, except for this addition to our evening prayer. Every night, Mom cut some of Jay's hair and sat down with Dad and me to pray. Jay got older and the ritual went on. My parents loved Jay. Mom often talked about how every day was a gift and we should be grateful because a tragedy could happen at any time. Unlike me growing up, Jay got everything new from the store. He began to be a little spoiled, but never naughty or uncontrollable. He was always happy, smiling, laughing, and doing crazy boy things like dancing on his chair at dinner. Mom would laugh with tears in her eyes. Dad, who had been strict with me, smiled, but I saw his eyes were red. They always seemed to be crying when they had every reason to be happy. I assumed this was how parents acted with a second child. The difference between my upbringing and Jay's became apparent in other ways too. When he learned to say his first words, I asked Mom if she would teach him about Z. But to my surprise, she glared at me and said, "You can never tell him about that. Even when he turns 5? Even then," she said, and went on folding laundry. After reading Jay to sleep, we all prayed in the room where my parents kept Z's statue behind a locked door. Jay never went inside, no matter how much he asked. We kneeled down. Mom placed a snippet of Jay's hair before Z. Then we prayed. "All our blood and bones belong to you. Lucky we who know that you are true. We do the things that others would not do." As we reached the final line, Mom dissolved into tears. Dad, kneeling at my side, reached around me to rub her shoulder. "It's all right," he whispered. She shook her head. "I'm a terrible mother." I glanced at the statue of Z with my hands still clasped. Its eyes had settled on her, and its grin looked wider than usual. Finally, we finished our prayers. Dad locked the door, and I went to bed. Soon, Jay began speaking like a healthy boy his age, and I discovered how a wrinkly-faced baby can slowly become full of personality. "Why is Mum's hair long?" asked Jay. "Because she's a girl," I said. I'd never seen a girl with short hair before. How did it get long? It just grows out and then she cuts it every once in a while. Why doesn't my hair grow out? Because when you go to sleep, Mom cuts it for you. Because it hurts when it gets cutted? No, because... I paused. Because it's easier. Does she cut your hair when you sleep too? Yes. Does she cut Dad's hair? Yes, she cuts all of our hair. Now stop asking questions. Our parents started planning a huge party for Jay's 5th birthday. All of his parties had been extravagant to the point of excess. This one was supposed to be even more elaborate, but Mom seemed less and less happy as the birthday got closer. She lived on the verge of tears and had to force herself to smile. Dad had red, moist eyes whenever Jay hugged or kissed him. They would spend an hour reading to him each night. I didn't share a bedroom with Jay, but our bathroom was connected. If I left the doors open, I could listen to their voices. One night, Mom told him an unusual story. "Don't you need a book?" "No, this one's all in my head," said Mom. I listened from my desk while I sat drawing. Once upon a time, there was a train driver. He had a very difficult job. He had to drive the train and keep all the passengers safe. He drove the train for many years and never had any problems. But one day, something terrible happened. I heard Jay ask, "Is this a scary story?" "Yes, it's a little scary, but I think you should hear it." "Okay." Mom went on. The terrible thing that happened was that someone was tied up on the tracks, like in those old Western films. Do you know what I'm talking about? Silence, while Jay probably nodded. Well, an innocent townsperson was tied up on the tracks. The train driver would have to pull a lever to change course, and he had enough time to do it. But then he found there was another problem. The other track had 3 people tied up on it. Couldn't he stop the train? No, the train can't stop in time. It takes too long. He just had enough time to decide if he'll pull the lever or not. And if he pulls it, 3 people die? Right, only 1 person dies if he doesn't pull it. I don't like this story. I don't like it either. Let's do a different one. I know it's scary, Jay, but it's important. I want to know what you would do. I don't like thinking about it. I feel the same way. Can we read Rabbits Make Soup instead? His voice had a slight whine to it. I'll read it after you give me your answer. I promise. In my mind, the right thing to do seemed obvious. Don't pull the lever and save the 3 people. But it didn't have the normal feeling of the right thing. It should be right no matter what. But this wasn't. I'd never heard a story like that. I think I know what to do, whispered Jay, but it still feels wrong. Yeah, I know what you mean. I think most people would agree with you. It feels sad for the boy who needs to die for the other 3. Yes, it's still sad for him. 3 people live if he dies though. What about his parents? They'll be devastated, but they'll feel proud to know that their little boy saved the lives of 3 other people. There was a long silence until Mum said, "Sometimes the right thing to do isn't the right thing for everybody. You just have to pick the rightest one." Jay had trouble sleeping that night, as one might expect. My parents stayed with him until past midnight. When at last he fell asleep, Dad fetched me for the prayers. I had needed to stay awake for them. "Sorry to keep you so late," he said, "but you know it's important." Dad unlocked the room, and we kneeled down in the light of the candle, saying the words that we always said to the thing with the moving eyes. Mom put Jay's hair down in front of it. That night, she looked resigned as she whispered, All our blood and bones belong to you. Lucky we who know that you are true. We do the things that others would not do. Jay's 5th birthday approached. I began hearing noises downstairs around that time. They came from the locked room and started after Mom and Dad fell asleep. Something paced back and forth inside. I heard it from the top of the staircase where I stood listening and wondering if I should wake up my parents. Eventually, the noises would stop and I would go to bed. Lying awake, I began to imagine the statue of Z with its clasped knees, searching eyes and thieving smiles. I imagined its long, ribbed neck like a third arm with a head on top, slowly unraveling itself and probing forward snake-like. I wonder if Mom heard Z, or whatever it was, moving in the locked room too, because she cried harder than usual during our prayers. "Mom, we can stop doing this if you don't like it," I whispered. Dad locked the door as Mom and I stood waiting in the dark. Red numbers from a digital clock on the stove coloured the downstairs crimson. "Do you know why we do what we do?" she asked. I shook my head. "It's all for you," she whispered. "All of this is for you, and you only." "But what about Jay?" I asked. I felt something hard and painful in my throat. "We love Jay, but we don't do this for him," she said. I looked at Dad, confused. "Promise us that whatever happens, you won't tell anybody." "Why?" He took a deep breath. "Because, son, we would make it mad." I glanced over my shoulder at the locked room and felt the hairs all over my body rising. "We made a promise long ago, and we need to keep that promise," whispered Dad. "What promise?" a fourth voice asked. It had come from the staircase. Jay stood near the top, crouching down to see us. "What promise?" he asked again. "Can I know?" "Go to bed, honey," said Mom in a smiling voice. "We're just promising that we'll all go to sleep earlier from now on." "Really?" asked Jay. "Isn't that right, son?" asked Dad. I nodded. "Let's go back to bed," said Mom, sheep-herding Jay to his bedroom. The next morning during breakfast, Jay asked again why we had been standing together in the darkness last night. "Did you dream that?" asked Mom, not looking up from the eggs in the frying pan. "No," said Jay. "I saw you. I think you just had a strange dream." Mom served us the eggs, still not looking at either of us. I just stared into my plate. "Just a dream," Mom said again, starting to wash the pan. The last night I ever saw my brother, the thing making noises in a locked room, came out. It happened on Jay's 5th birthday. I think we threw the biggest party any boy his age had ever had. It shocked me to see the lengths to which my parents had gone, all while trying not to cry. Mom burst into tears in front of all of the guests several times. She had just handed Jay a gift when the tears started pouring down her face. Jay stared in confusion, not sure if he should open the gift or not. My aunt asked if Mom needed anything. "They just grow up so fast, you know," Mom said, wiping her face. Jay went to sleep that night in an ecstasy of gift-getting. He was probably the happiest kid alive. I think my parents intended that to be the case from the beginning. It was supposed to make them feel better. About what happened next? Mom cried hysterically through our prayers after Jay fell asleep and went on crying in bed until late. Sometime around 3 o'clock, I heard the thing moving around downstairs in the locked room. I crept out of bed to peek from the top stair and saw the handle of the room jiggling. It popped open, and in the red glow of the clock, I thought I saw a floating black snake moving slowly through the air and into the kitchen. Except this snake had something like a human's head on the end. It leapt away from the staircase, ran to my room, and jumped into bed. But for a long time I heard nothing. All I could hear was my own breathing, and I struggled to keep quiet. The staircase began to groan. It seemed to take hours to reach the second floor. Mom was crying across the hall in her bedroom. Dad yelled out to me, "Stay in your room, son. Do not come out." The thing reached my door and paused. I heard the handle turning, but I kept my head under the blankets, shaking and dripping sweat. With my closed eyes, I heard it lurching toward the front of my bed. I felt a gentle pressure on the blankets covering my feet. Something began slithering up the bed, searching in the blanket folds. It sniffed like a wild animal chasing a scent. Something wet and warm even brushed against my thigh, but the entity just kept searching and sniffing all the way to the back of my head beside my ear. And this time, I heard and felt the sniffing. Hot breath filled my left ear. Its cheek rubbed against the side of my face. Its nose took a deep whiff of my hair. It seemed to be waiting, unsure of something. Then it slowly pulled away, and I thought of Z's head being dragged backward across my bed by its coiling neck. Finally, I heard it walking out. I stayed under the covers. Gone or not gone, I refused to check either way. But I kept listening. Footsteps in the hallway advanced towards Jay's door and stopped again. He must have been awake, because he screamed. Jay slept with his door open and would have seen Z standing in the doorway. First would have come Z's head, peeking around the corner. It would have hovered into the room, supported by its rope of neck. The body would have come next, hunched forward, hands reaching out and grasping. Jay cried out for Mom first. I could hear him through the connecting bathroom. It went on and on. Nobody came. He tried calling Dad. Dad didn't come. He tried calling me. Finally, Dad's voice broke through. "If we don't give it what it wants, it'll kill us instead. Do you understand? It will kill us." Instead of running to help, I did something unforgivable. I shut the bathroom door connecting our rooms. The screams grew muffled, and I got back into bed, pulled the blankets over me, and shut my eyes. Not long after, the screams stopped. At some point, I think I heard the thing moving back down the hallway and stairs, closing the door behind it. I stayed awake until morning, clenching my fists, sweating in the hot air below the blanket. I only stuck out my head when I heard birds singing and took a breath of air, sunshine on my face. Mom didn't leave her room that day. Dad cooked for me, and we ate in silence. I never checked my brother's room. I didn't want to know what happened. After sunset, Mom came downstairs. We needed to pray. We kneeled down in front of the statue with my brother's hair still in front of it and said what we always said. "All our blood and bones belong to you. Lucky we who know that you are true. We do the things that others would not do." Coming out of the room, Dad locked the door and Mom put her hands on my shoulder, looking me straight in the eyes. "Do you understand now? This was all for you." I said nothing. "You can never stop praying," said Dad. "Understand? And neither will we." you get clearance?" I asked as Kim approached my workstation. "Some questions about a cousin with a big following on Instagram, but that's about it," she replied. "Not the most normal background check I've been through. I don't really get the big deal though. They brought me here. Why do I need further clearance just to enter this funny little place?" "It's about containment," I said. "No one thinks you're going to steal equipment or military secrets, although God knows my drones are valuable enough to the right people." I reached out and patted the sleek black hull of the car-sized submersible laid out on the large workbench before me. "They're concerned about more generalized social media leaks. What they have here, well, it's odd to say the least. Has Alex briefed you yet?" "Yeah, he did," she answered. "I'm assuming that's—" She nodded towards the enormous pressure chamber that dominated the room. "I didn't really think it was true when Alex told me," she continued. "They're talking about a possible inland sea that was sealed off 100,000 years ago, right? They say the pressure keeps it liquid." "That's the official story, but no one knows for sure," I replied. "Unlike Lake Vostok, no one knew this place was here until they stumbled across it. Alex's team was originally here just doing meteorological work." "How did they drill a tunnel down to it if they didn't know it was there?" Kim asked as she stepped past me and went to the chamber's bulkhead. "My guess is they were doing something they shouldn't be," I answered while moving beside her to look through the glass. "You'll probably find the US government is up to all sorts down here, and that's why they're keeping it secret. I mean, it's that, or what Alex told me is true, and that's just, well, not possible." "What did he say?" "He told me the hole appeared on its own," I shrugged. "The chamber came afterwards to allow access and stop the water flooding upwards from the pressure." She leaned forward and wiped the condensation off the tiny little window on the steel door. "Maybe that's why they don't want us telling anyone about it," Kim replied. "Maybe they don't know what's down there yet, and they want to know first before celebrating it as a scientific discovery of the century." Kim stood on her toes to look through the glass and into the water below. Beyond was a small room with a floor covering in churning black water that never seemed to stay still. The movement reminded me of an ocean in miniature with waves that never stopped. Sometimes, if I stared too long, I felt a kind of vertigo from the warped perspective, like I was looking down on some colossal ancient ocean from hundreds of feet in the air. I couldn't help but wonder what made the water move like that. I figured that it must be driven by forces and currents that originated miles beneath the ice, which was a sobering reminder that I was staring at a direct connection to a primordial abyss unlike any other on the planet. "Gotta wonder what's down there," Kim muttered. I didn't respond. She might have continued talking, but if she did, it was lost to me. The whole world was reduced to a background hum that barely registered while the water dominated my view with mesmerizing force. The currents had changed. I couldn't say for sure, but for the briefest of moments, it had looked as if the water had been disturbed by something below. I could have sworn I saw something slithering just beneath the waves. I shook my head and dismissed the thought. "Come on," I told her. "We've got work to do." "What's that?" Alex reached out to the seemingly featureless video feed on the 100-inch monitor. For the last 20 minutes, it had shown us nothing but black fuzzy noise as the drone descended into what had been dubbed Lake Saturn. The room stayed silent with anticipation, despite the dozen or so people crowded around me as I clutched the joystick with white knuckles. "I didn't see anything," I answered. "Probably just noise. If anything gets close, we'll know for sure. The light on this thing could cut through brick." "What are we expecting to see in this water exactly?" Kim asked. "I'd be shocked if life down there is multicellular. It's been cut off from the outside world for hundreds of thousands of years." A pale, thin tentacle whipped past, both languid and lightning fast, as if its size and speed was somehow mismatched. All at once, everyone lurched away from the screens, reacting like the monster might reach through the glass and snatch one of us. For a few seconds, we were all dumbfounded until the tension eased and people let out astonished gasps and nervous chuckles. A few scientists even cried out in celebration before scurrying away to a smaller desk to agonize over the recorded footage. Well, Now we know, I said, utterly astonished. Multicellular life. Another tentacle whipped past, and the accelerometers on the drone registered a kinetic shock, not that we saw or heard anything of it. The drone's camera showed only pixelated darkness. It's just scoping us out, I said, looking intently at the profile of the acceleration on the drone's instruments. The submersible was being nudged a little from side to side, but it was hardly under attack. It might even be described as a light cuddle considering the size of the drone and the monster doing it. The encounter lasted a few seconds at most before the squid retreated back into the deep as quickly as it emerged. Jesus, Kim cried. The ventral camera and LiDAR instruments measure it at 30 feet long. World record for a verified specimen was 22 feet, I said. So that's the first record broken on this mission. Kim and I began to laugh like excited children, and after a few seconds, the others joined in. I've never been so happy to be so wrong, she grinned. Life, honest to God, multicellular life. There must be an ecosystem down here. Predators, prey, some kind of base to it, bacteria, fungi, maybe even some kind of plant. The sub's descent continued. Occasionally the sonar would pick up passing shapes in the void, but nothing else came close enough to register visually. It was unnerving, if I'm honest. Even though I was perfectly safe, I couldn't help but imagine myself down there in that impossibly black water while unseen shapes glided silently around me, just a few dozen meters away. It took another hour before we were within 30 feet of the bottom, at which point I slowed the sub's descent and, using downward-facing ventral cameras, looked for some sign of the lake bed. What finally resolved on the smaller screen was a complicated array of strange and irregular-looking rocks. There were spiraling ammonites and lifeless shells everywhere, strange bones jutting out of what looked like an endless carpet of bone-white death. What? I muttered. Animals must have been trapped in the water when it froze over, Alex said. Animal graveyards are common when excavated dried-up lake beds. Is this normal? I asked. No, he shook his head. Not like this. Not so many. Talk about an understatement, I said as I began to pilot the drone in an outward spiral. Every camera showed the same thing, an endless plain of jumbled ivory that stretched out in every direction. If there was a flaw beneath those bones, we couldn't see it in that location. So, what does the squid eat? Kim asked. If everything in the lake died. As if in answer, our portside camera picked up the sluggish movement of a pale white starfish. Slowly, it crawled out of the nasal bone of an ancient whale and probed its surroundings. It's 30 feet wide, I said as I squinted the readings on one of the dozen screens. Do starfish come that big normally? Most of the biologists were too busy taking notes to answer, which I took to be a no. But Alex was polite enough to tear his eyes from the screen and answer. Absolutely not, he said. It must grow so big from a lack of... A fish larger than the drone swept past the screen and the starfish was gone. I had the fleeting impression of glassy transparent teeth and an eyeless face worse than anything found in the Challenger Deep. Wrinkled and frowning, it was an aquatic nightmare that left me shaking in my seat. What the hell? Kim groaned. Jesus, that was... Not that, she said, tapping me on my shoulder and gesturing to another screen. There's something odd about 100 yards east. We need to take a look. She reached for the controls and I stopped her. Despite the intense desire to get up and leave, I felt compelled to see this through. I grabbed the joystick and began to navigate on the heading she gave, my eyes so fixed on numerical readouts that I let my eyes drift from the main screen. Oh my God. I looked up, worried I made a grievous error and damaged the drone, and what I saw made my body go limp. We were looking at a building. A temple, in fact. I couldn't say for sure it was a place of worship, of course, but there was no other way to describe the grave-looking structure with its ancient pillars and decorative flourishes reminiscent of ancient Greece. Perplexed, I let go of the controls and sat back, head tilted like a confused dog. In the end, I settled for what seemed like the only logical explanation. Is this a prank? Some of the other scientists with me actually agreed. Kim and several biologists all nodding while turning to look at Alex, the head of the facility. But the look on his face made it clear that if this was a hoax, he wasn't in on it. He was pale, eyes wide, every bit as shocked as we were. "Why would we do that?" he asked us. "How would we even manage it?" "Those steps are 30 feet tall," someone cried before I could push the point any further. I looked away from the screen to see a geologist stood by one of the dozens of smaller screens filled with complex readings. "Can you get closer?" he asked me. I took a look at the drone camera and approached the first of 20 steps ascending from the lake bed towards the temple. Pretty quickly, I was able to confirm that each step was a gargantuan slab of stone that towered above the drone. "This is real?" I asked Alex as he stepped closer to me, my voice an urgent whisper. He nodded. I looked back at the screen and saw that I was still piloting the drone up and over the steps. At the top, it was apparent just how out of proportion the rest of the temple was. The doorway, a great big yawning black portal, must have been several hundred feet tall, and it loomed over the submersible like a man over an ant. Our lights barely penetrated the dark from where we hovered at the threshold, but they did show a stony floor retreating into the void, its surface covered in snowy detritus. In the distance, another tentacle slipped briefly into the light before slithering away. Something about its pallid white features in the sunken dark made my skin crawl, and when I looked up at the crowd, I saw I wasn't the only one whose nerves were frayed. Sweaty, pale faces stared at the screen, unable to look away, but utterly distraught at the implications of what they were seeing. Here was a building at the bottom of the world, standing impossibly tall and impossibly large, its doorway beckoning us to explore further. "Should I keep going?" I asked, hoping someone would find a good reason to stop. It didn't matter that it wasn't me down there. I didn't want to push this journey deeper into madness. I was afraid, and no matter how much I reminded myself of the vast differences between me and the source of the images on screen, I could not escape the terrifying fact that the things I was seeing were real. Somewhere beneath my feet lay that abyss, and within it lay a temple beyond all human proportions, and the thought made me feel like my mind was on fire. "Keep going," Kim said, and I knew she was right to. It was the only choice. "We need to know." Nervously, I pushed the drone onwards, watching with anxiety as the side cameras showed the edge of the portal sliding by our sides. As impossible as it was, I felt as though I was personally stepping into the temple and could feel a cold draft wash over my skin. I shivered and did my best to push the ridiculous idea aside. The room beyond was massive, too large for our meager little lights to see much. After a few seconds of nerve-wracking silence, I finally found my courage to ask, "Do the instruments pick anything out? I feel like I need directions here." We're getting something a little south of your position. It's stationary, so it should be..." The entire room cried out as the drone's camera was violently shaken, the view reeling as if the whole drone was being thrown around. Alarms blared from a dozen monitors as every system registered a dozen violations of expected norms. My hands froze up. I was unsure how to proceed. There was a momentary spike of adrenaline as my body reacted as though I'd personally been attacked. And then training took over as I let go of the controls and waited for a few seconds as a flurry of bubbles and strange shapes flitted past the lens. "The drone can't be damaged easily," I told everyone. "Not by an animal. We just need to be patient." Eventually, the alarms quieted down as different team members worked to shut them off. I watched the accelerometer intensely. I could tell that whatever was attacking the drone was slowing down, probably because it realized its prey wasn't edible. "Looks like another squid," someone called, pointing to a dorsal camera that showed a slimy feeler clamped around the hull. "Just wait," I said. "It's out of our hands now, but if we're patient, it should just leave us alone." For a few more minutes, the drone continued to move of its own accord, being pulled to and fro by some unseen shape. Occasionally, we would catch a glimpse of an overhead ceiling covered in detailed mosaics of a fleshy-looking mountain, or of a beautiful stone pillar cradling an ancient brazier. But there was no opportunity to study these things in detail. They appeared as fleeting blurs of colour and shape. Whatever was down there was wrestling with a submersible like it expected a meal out of it, but I knew eventually it would have to give up. "Look!" Whoever cried out didn't need to bother. Whatever had attacked the drone slid around its sleek hull until it faced the forward camera, allowing itself to be seen in full light for the first time. It towered over us from the main display like it was somehow aware that we were on the other side of the camera. But whether it was angry, hostile, or just plain curious, I couldn't say. It merely stared at us with an eyeless cone for a head. Slowly, the strange creature retreated from the light. That didn't mean it was finished with us, though. One of its longest tendrils remained stuck to the drone, which it used to tow us carefully back towards the entrance of the temple. "Well, this is exciting," I said after a few minutes passed. "It's throwing us out of its house." "You're not seriously proposing it built that thing?" Kim asked. "No," I said. "Why build steps if you don't have feet? I think it's just moved in. Probably makes for great shelter." The creature stopped just as it reached the doorway. All of a sudden, it changed colour, flashing from spectral white to a blood orange, pulsating over and over while we all stared at the baffling change in behaviour. "A threat display, perhaps?" Kim asked. As quickly as it appeared, the squid shrank away, letting go of the drone right by the temple's doorway. A quick glance at the rear camera showed it fleeing back into the darkness. I was about to ask what had happened when a strange cerulean light flooded the doorway. An eye blocked the doorway, a pupilless pale blue sphere that glowed with malice in the dark. Slowly, its owner retreated until a monstrous shape glowered down at us. A faint bioluminescence hung around it like an aura, a silhouette faintly visible in the abyss. Its shape was utterly alien. If it hadn't moved, I might have thought I was looking at a plant or a strange rock formation. It reminded me of tumours and wasp nests. I couldn't tell all of its eyes apart from the complicated pattern of dots and frills that covered a bubbling asymmetrical head the size of an apartment block. It was with ever-rising horror that I realised I had glimpsed simple portrayals of this very creature in the temple mosaics, the implications of which burned at my mind like a hot coal. This thing dwarfed all reason, all sense. It floated menacingly in the darkness, just at the limits of the light. Of the rest of its body, there was no sign. But I hated it. I hated it instinctively and without reason, even as I told myself it was a scientific find of the century. It made my skin crawl and my stomach drop, and all I wanted to do was lash out and get the hell away from it. Slowly, it raised a branching, writhing appendage towards the drone. That was when we lost the feed. The wind outside was fierce. The facility we were staying in was situated on a continental plain, not far from a cluster of inland mountains where the wind swept down the slopes and sped up, unimpeded, to hundreds of miles per hour. It never snowed in Antarctica, but that didn't stop hurricane winds from snatching up tiny particles of ice and whipping them at you with terrifying speed. The effect was a whiteout, a grey, sombre void on the other side of every window that left nothing visible. No sky, no sun, not even the icy floor beneath the main building's elevated foundations. "It's almost too much," Kim said after a while. "If we just found a jellyfish, it wouldn't be a lot, but people would believe us. But this, it's like something out of a bad movie. How am I supposed to get up at a conference and show people this footage? Kim, Alex and I were sat in the canteen. All the other scientists had wandered off to their own rooms to begin the lifetime's task of going through every reading we had. Every pulse of sonar, every bit of infrared, every minute fluctuation in temperature and pressure. It had to be understood, catalogued, made sense of. In a way, it was probably a comfort to them to hide from the madness by fixating on the minutiae. You know what I think, Kim said. Forget any results. I want to leave. Let someone else get the glory. Even if we wanted to, Alex said, the storm prohibits flying for at least another week. Just so long as I can be the first one out, she replied. Maybe when the storm's clear we can discuss people leaving, I said. But for now, we've got enough data to last us a lifetime and enough equipment to analyze. Sir, a young man burst into the room. I immediately recognized him as belonging to the security attachment that had flown in with me. So far, the 5 or 6 armed men had kept separate from the scientists. I could have easily forgotten that there was anyone staying in the facility who wasn't a researcher. It must have been an incredibly boring job, at least under normal circumstances. The man who stood before me didn't look bored though. He looked worried out of his depth. Alex was clearly the sir he'd been referring to, and the older man immediately stood up and addressed him. What's going on? He asked. There's been a breach, sir, he said. Something has entered the chamber. How do you possibly know that? Alex cried. We can hear it, sir. We entered the ground building to find that we had 2 immediate problems. The first was that the pressurized chamber was under intense stress. Internal readings showed that water had flooded the room and was applying incredible force against the reinforced walls. So far they were holding, but the pressure was steadily increasing, and we knew that, sooner or later, something would give. The second problem was the sound that emanated from within. Thunk, thunk, thunk. I flinched each time it rang out, physically recoiling from the bulkhead with fear. I tried to hide it from the others, but looking around, I realized it wasn't necessary. Alex, Kim, and the security guard were all equally terrified. Something was inside that room. Something that had come up from the lake below and was patiently beating a tattoo against the wall with unsettling regularity. I am here, the sound seemed to say. I am here, and I want to meet you. We need to release the pressure, Alex said. His voice was shaky, his skin pale. We need to... I'm not opening that door, Kim snapped. I looked at the pressure readings and grimaced. It's not giving us a choice, I said. If that structure fails, it'll be worse than a bomb going off. All the more reason not to open it, Kim cried. Think about what you just said. It's not giving us a choice. Do you want to play that game? We don't know what it wants, Alex replied. We don't know what it is. Maybe what? She said. Maybe it's here to play chess, to be our friend. Is that seriously what we're proposing? If that chamber blows, I said, we get answers to those questions whether we like it or not. We can retreat to safety, sure, but it doesn't make any of our problems go away. Besides, it doesn't have to be the door we open. There are specialized valves to release pressure that we can use to keep it from blowing. Thunk, thunk, thunk. If Kim had any counter-arguments, they were forgotten. The walls of the chamber had shaken, and something, some screw or bolt, had flung out and struck the ceiling and punched a hole right through. Alex, I said, help me get the pressure valves open. This is insane, Kim cried as I walked over to the nearest valve. Thunk, thunk. The knocking stopped just as my hand gripped the wheel. A look at Alex showed he was sweating despite the cold. He hesitated to come any closer, lurking a few feet away from me and the chamber. I need help, I told him. Okay, he said, nodding so absent-mindedly I wondered if he was in some kind of shock. Come on, I cried while pointing to the opposite side of the wheel. Alex was startled by my shouting, but he finally started to walk across the vent and towards me. Alex, we don't need to do... Kim started to say, before she was suddenly cut off. Thunk. A final hammer blow was louder than any other we'd heard. It was like a peal of thunder went off right next to my ear, an explosive punch delivered with perfect timing, and I soon realized in a very precise location. The valve broke open just as Alex had passed the opening. Water gushed out with tremendous force, enough to knock him back. Internal mechanisms were designed to control the flow, and they stopped the blow from being lethal. But it was still a brutal strike, and he was sent skittering across the floor while the water spewed out in a furious torrent. I could see him under the black brine, struggling desperately, and I thanked God he was alive. I immediately ran over to drag Alex away from bubbling water, even as my mind raced with the terrifying realization that whatever had attacked the chamber had done so with impossible insight. On some level, I knew it must be scrutinizing us, and it took every ounce of courage just to stay in the room. Alex struggled as I took hold of one of his legs and tried to pull him out from under the water. I paid it little attention and dragged him clear of the flow, intent on helping him. But the insight of a glistening black tentacle wrapped around his head made me recoil and cry out. But the sight of a glistening black tentacle wrapped around his head made me recoil and cry out. I fell on my ass and heard a chorus of disgusted and horrified cries as Kim and some new arrivals took register of the strange growth that enveloped the man's head. It was a repulsive cluster of alien musculature attached to a glistening black tendril trailing back through the open valve. "Get it off!" I shouted at the room in general, hoping to God that someone would have an idea what to do. Alex's struggles were already growing faint. Thunk, thunk, thunk. Before any of us could take another breath, there was the briefest sound of tightening fibers before the tendril whipped back into the chamber. It passed effortlessly through the 6-inch wide opening and did not slow or even show any sign of a struggle. Not even when, with the sound of silk tearing, it took most of Alex with it. I had made the decision to withdraw from the study and the site at large. Kim was clearly relieved, and so was I. Whatever excitement we felt over the find was diminished by the memory of having to clean up Alex's remains. I knew I would never forget having to lift the body bag only to realize it barely weighed more than 20 kilos. We had found something nightmarish down in that lake, and the small encounter we'd already survived were more than enough to keep me sleepless for years to come. Unfortunately, the storm was still raging outside, and we had no hope of evacuation by air for at least another 3 days. Kim and I were kept busy packing up our equipment, but Kim's speciality was data analysis and not engineering, so there were times where the work fell entirely on me. It was on the second night that I told her to head to bed early while I finished up the last 30 minutes or so of work. But only a few minutes after she left, I found myself staring at the chamber that dominated the room like a strange obelisk. The image of that thing glaring at us through the screen returned to me, and with a shiver, I decided I would finish packing the rest in the morning. Staying alone in that place for even a moment or two was a stupid thing to do. "Stephen?" The sound was an electric whisper that made my limbs weak and my hands falter. Equipment hit the ground with a clatter I barely heard. All my attention was on one of the speakers by a station at the back wall. It belonged to one of the geologists who had loaded microphones down in the original dive and was using them to record an audio profile of the lake below. With everything going on, it had escaped all of our notice. But as I stared at the glowing green monitor, it dawned on me that the microphone was probably the last remaining piece of equipment still in the water. So why had I just heard Alex speak my name into it? I told myself I'd been mistaken, even as I decided I would sprint the whole way back to my room. "Stephen," the voice said before I could take a single step. "Stephen, it's cold down here." "This isn't real," I muttered. "I know what the temple was built for." Alex's voice was the wet gurgle of a pneumonia patient in their last days. It made me think of someone drowning in mucus, of a desperate soul consumed by pain and despair. "Stephen," he wailed, "it won't let me die." His words hit me like a sledgehammer. For a second, I thought there was nothing in the entire world that could frighten me more. It was then that the door to the pressure chamber swung open. I found myself rooted to the spot with mounting terror as my mind processed the impossible. An enormous titanium bulkhead, otherwise inoperable to anything except powerful hydraulics, had glided open like a creaking mansion door. Black water immediately bubbled forth and filled the air with rolling steam and a cloying stench unlike anything else I'd ever smelled. It was awful. A foul mixture of rotting flesh, ammonia, and a musty scent that really was unrivaled. Some kind of flotsam came with pale stripes of strange-looking plants and unrecognizable biological matter. The room I was in was large, but by the time I managed to look down and realized that my shoes were already wet and time was running out, I turned and ran, desperate to outrace the water that was already surging past my feet and flowing towards the door, threatening to trip me. All around me, equipment started to topple, desks dragged along the floor with an ear-cringing squeal, while computers short-circuited and fell over. Under other circumstances, I would have been in tears from the loss of data and expensive one-of-a-kind technology. But I was ready to sacrifice anything if it meant getting out of there sooner. I pushed ahead, increasingly aware that the water was fast on its way to flooding the entire place and showed no signs of slowing. Pretty soon, I'd be wading through the stuff at knee height. The thought had me picking up my pace, but I managed to only get halfway to the door before the lights cut out. Immediately, my foot hit something unseen, something that moved. I was sent sprawling forwards, completely blind and fumbling in the dark. Despite the water, I hit the concrete hard, and my wrist rolled, plunging me face first in the ever-rising torrent. The feel of it enclosing my head made my heart pound with hysterical panic, and for a brief second, I wondered if I might already be dead and trapped in my worst nightmare. Eventually, the panic passed, and, using my good hand, I got some purchase on the floor and pushed myself up with a desperate gasp. With perfect timing, the emergency lights finally kicked in, and the room was suffused in the dim pale glow of rarely used fluorescence. I'd been thrown halfway across the room and was further from the door than ever, but the water had stopped rising and was eerily still. All the different workstations had been shifted to new locations by the current, but were now at rest, bits of equipment strewn haplessly across the surfaces or missing somewhere in water below. Once I was standing, the only sound was the occasional slosh of water and the all-pervading drip, drip, drip. Quietly, terrified that the movement would attract attention, I lifted one leg and took a step backwards. Nothing changed above the surface, but for all I knew, a dozen unseen shapes were converging on my position, and I had no way to stop them, or even know how long I had to live. The only thing I could do was stick to the plan and keep moving 1 foot at a time. I managed another 3 steps when one of the desks slid a few inches across the floor. It was a gut-wrenching reminder that something was active beneath the water. It didn't help that all manner of things floated around, ranging from office furniture to unrecognizable clumps of rotting albino plants. Sometimes something would slither past my leg, touching my bare ankles, and I had no way of knowing if it was a living thing or just some dead piece of flotsam drifting aimlessly beneath the surface. When the door opened behind me, it was a sudden reminder that a world existed beyond that room. It had been barely 10 minutes since I heard Alex speak, but I'd spent that time so terrified that my perception had narrowed until I could only think of things that mattered to my direct survival. I'd completely forgotten that the power outage would have alerted others. I was so fixed on whatever shared that water with me that I didn't even turn to greet my rescuers or respond to their cries. Nothing but survival could find purchase in my adrenaline-addled mind. It wasn't until I heard feet splashing past me and saw several men stomping past, guns raised, that I looked up and saw Kim reaching out to touch my shoulder. "What happened?" she asked. "Did you open the bulkhead?" I must have been pale as a ghost, because when I looked at her, she froze up a little, like my fear was contagious. "Shut it down," I hissed between clenched teeth, even as I lifted one leg to continue my painstaking backwards walk. "Explosives, grenades, anything. Shut it down." "It'll freeze on its own anyway," she replied. "The heating rods have turned off. That's probably why it hasn't flooded this whole room up to the ceiling." "Why did you open the door?" she repeated. "I didn't open anything," I whispered. "Kim, we aren't alone in here." "What?" He said, "You aren't alone up there." Kim's eyes went wide as dinner plates at the sound of Alex's voice coming from the speaker. "Screw this," I cried while grabbing a hand and turning to run the last few meters back to the door. As I turned away, one of the men inside the room cried out and went down, but I didn't turn to look back, not even when gunfire rang out and ricochets pinged the wall nearest my head. Instead, I forced leaden feet through the grimy water, Kim in tow, and did my best to ignore the screams. When we reached the door, I threw us both out onto the metal walkway beyond and went to slam the door shut, but was left struggling against the water that continuously poured out. "Help!" I cried, reaching out to help Kim from where she had fallen. "What about the men inside?" She looked inside at the same time she asked the question. By now the gunfire had stopped, but there was still the sound of struggling feet and crying men, along with crashing furniture. With a whip-crack sound, one of the men let out a terrible scream, and Kim jerked back from the doorway, her face covered in blood. "Shut the damn door," she screamed suddenly. Whatever she had seen had clearly changed her mind, and I was glad I'd missed it. I was only grateful that she joined me in pushing it in. "Are you sure it's all done in there?" I asked. "The water's all frozen." Kim nodded as we stood by the door to the ground facility. It had been 2 days, and we had stayed in the base a few hundred meters away, refusing to answer any of the other scientists' questions and threatening hell on anyone who dared to go look for themselves. It certainly hadn't earned us any friends, but we didn't care. Our evac was just an hour out, and we were all too ready to leave that godforsaken continent. But there was still one last job to do. Using a crowbar, I wrenched the door out of its frame. Kim made a passing comment that whatever lived down there could have easily gotten out if it wanted to, but I just ignored it. I had no way of knowing what the thing could or couldn't do, and for once, ignorance was enough for me. Whatever its motivations or choices, it had been content with taking the men we'd left behind, and no one else. To my shame, I only felt relief about this. "Stephen, I'm so cold. My mind is falling apart. I can feel bits of myself sloughing away. What are you? I can't see you. Where am I? What was that? Something's coming. Jesus Christ, why won't I die?" Kim faltered at the sound of their voices. She looked at me with terror, and I knew she'd seen the same thing written on my face. "You were right," she said. "They're still..." I nodded. I could hear them when I came out to check the door on the first night. How are they? Are they down there?" she cried. "I don't know," I shook my head. "But there'll be a team here soon. They'll find the tunnel frozen over, the facility destroyed, our data centers ruined. But this..." I gestured to the room with the voices within. "This will demand further investigation," she said. "How can we get them to stop? Do you have a plan to help them?" To get inside the room, I had to step up onto a solid foot of ice that had frozen. Emergency lighting had failed entirely by now, but there was enough daylight to make the gloomy place beyond visible. Their heads, Kim stuttered as she looked at the array of corpses. They're all gone. How are they? I don't understand either, I said as I carefully shuffled over to the farthest workstation. It was there that the voices cried out from an overturned speaker. But we can't help them. I hesitated for a moment as I took out the wire cutters and found the cord leading to the ruined pressure chamber. Even now, the men hadn't stopped baying like a discordant mob of hellbound souls. There were pleas for help and desperate insults born of desperation. I wondered for a split second if there really was something we could do, but that would involve drilling down to the lake and beginning this nightmare anew. This wasn't some errant animal we were dealing with. It was intelligent and cruel and older than we could possibly imagine. Even worse, it could toy with dead men and keep them alive to prolong their suffering. There was a forgotten god down there. It needed to stay forgotten. I cut the wire and the voices stopped immediately. But they're still down there, Kim said, her voice an injured whisper. With deliberate slowness, the wire was pulled from my hand and back into the chamber before disappearing through a pinprick hole in the ice. And so is something else, I said. Let's keep it that way. The smell of freshly brewed coffee was strong in the air as I descended the stairs. I stretched languidly when I reached the bottom, my body still trying to wake up after a long, good night's sleep. Good morning all, I announced as I made my way into the kitchen. I gave my wife a quick peck as I passed by the stove. Dad! My son squealed, hopping out of his chair and rushing over. That never got old. Luke was 4 and a firecracker. I lifted the boy off his feet and swung him around, much to the chagrin of his mother, who was trying to get him to settle down long enough to eat his Cheerios. Noticing Claire's harrowed expression, I quickly dropped Luke back into his little chair to finish his breakfast. How did you sleep, little man? Fine. Reggie came to see me last night. Ah, yes. And how is fine Reginald doing these days? I asked with mock seriousness. His name is Reggie, Dad, not Reginald, Luke said, drawing out the last syllable as if the name Reginald was an absolutely absurd moniker. Apologies. How is Reggie doing? I responded, enunciating the name. My wife shot me a dark look. I knew I shouldn't encourage this new imaginary friend my son had concocted. Claire certainly did not approve, but I honestly couldn't see the harm in it. He was 4 after all. What 4-year-old hasn't had an imaginary friend? And as we had just moved into a new home in a new village, I think it was his way of coping with being in a strange place and settling in. The move to Castlewood was somewhat unexpected. My job had offered the chance of a transfer, along with a sizable promotion. It was too good of a deal to pass up. The drawback was, of course, that the abrupt change had left very little time for my child and wife to acclimate to our new surroundings. He's okay, said Luke. I glanced up at Luke. Just okay? That's too bad. What did good old Reggie have to say? Nothing much, Luke said, slurping milk from his spoon. Just stuff. Just stuff, I parroted. Yeah, he said he doesn't like you. I feigned distress. No, Reggie, you wound me. I tickled Luke lightly, which resulted in a round of giggles. Well, perhaps I can meet Reggie officially at your birthday party next weekend, and he will realise I'm not such a bad guy. My son laughed brightly and responded nonchalantly. That's silly, Dad. Reggie can't come. He's dead. I heard the spatula my wife was holding clatter onto the stove. We both locked eyes. I paused for a beat before responding. You say Reggie's dead? I finally asked, looking back to my son. Sure, he's been dead for a long time, my son responded, before spooning another mouthful of Cheerios into his mouth. Mom, can I go out and play in the garden now? I've finished almost the whole bowl. Claire looked slightly distracted before she nodded slightly to Luke. Yes, but make sure to bring your bowl to the sink first. Yes, Mom, Luke shouted, already running his half-full bowl of cereal to the sink. He dashed out into the backyard without a second look back. I stared at his retreating figure. What do you think that was all about? I asked my wife. I don't know. Quite creepy, don't you think? She responded. Quite. I don't know how he could have concocted such a story, to be honest. I think there's something to it. Claire shot a look of disdain my way. Are you asking me if there's a ghost haunting our house and he visits our son at night? Really, John? What, you don't believe in ghosts? Of course not, it's a load of nonsense. Please don't tell me you actually believe that. I don't know, I said with a look of contemplation. I think there's a lot in the universe we don't understand. Who's to say there's not something after death? She turned back to my eggs that she was still cooking. That's ridiculous, John. Anyway, as you've said before many times, it's just a harmless imaginary friend, right? She looked back over her shoulder at me. Right, I muttered, only half listening at this point. My mind was on other matters now. I stared out the window, watching Luke play in his sandbox. Maybe I should stay in Luke's room tonight. You know, check it out. Make sure there's not some weirdo sneaking into our son's room at night. Really? Don't you think that's a little overkill? What could it hurt? It's a Friday night. Mom would be happy to keep him for a sleepover. They can binge watch Paw Patrol while she gorges on popcorn and sugar cookies, and you can get a night to relax in the tub with a glass of wine and a good book. She tried to look annoyed, but I could tell she was intrigued by the idea. This is ridiculous, you know, she says half-heartedly. Come on, you know a good soak and a night to yourself sounds pretty damn good. She rolled her eyes. I knew I'd won. Whatever, but if your mom is busy, it's off. Just as I predicted, Mom was pleased as punch to take Luke for the night. She picked him up early that evening, and Claire and I enjoyed a lovely carry-out pizza and cheap wine. I sent her off to have a bubble bath while I watched some goofy alien show on the History Channel. By 11 o'clock, I found myself getting sleepy and ready to turn in. After changing into my PJs and brushing my teeth, I announced to my wife that I was off to commune with the dead in my hokiest spooky voice. She was already in bed and engrossed in a paperback. Have fun, she muttered distractedly, blowing me a kiss. I left the warmth of her bedroom and shuffled down the hall into Luke's room. I flipped on the overhead light and looked around. The pale blue walls sported a large clown mural, which stared back at me with a large, toothy grin. I shuddered. Why, oh why, did my wife decide on a carnival theme for his new room? There was nothing creepier than a clown, hands down. I walked over to Luke's tiny bed with his striped blue comforter. My feet would hang off the end, but I would survive. I crawled into bed and shut off the lamp that was shaped like an elephant. Darkness enveloped the room, save for a small nightlight in the corner shaped like a big top. The soft red light gave the clown a hellish glow. How had I not noticed how creepy this room could be at night? Turning away from the creepiest clown, I lay down and tried my best to slow my breathing and relax. I awoke abruptly from a deep sleep to the sound of creaking. I had a moment of confusion as I tried to recognize my unfamiliar surroundings. Right, Luke's room. I rubbed the sleep out of my eyes and looked around, trying to locate the source of the noise. The closet door in the far right corner was ajar. Hadn't it been closed when I went to sleep? Luke's tiny backpack swung slightly from where it hung on the doorknob. Hello? I tentatively whispered. Is anyone there? Silence. I turned to my right and my gaze landed on the damn clown. I really needed to talk to Claire about that. The nightlight still gave off that creepy red glow, making the room appear almost disorienting. I looked around the roof, noting the pile of stuffed animals in the corner and the bookcase by the door. "You're not Luke." My gaze whipped back over to the closet. The voice was so quiet, I couldn't even be sure I'd heard it. "Who's there?" I whispered to the closet. Again, silence met my query. I rubbed my eyes. This was ridiculous. What was I even doing in here? I was working myself up over nothing. I was a grown-ass man sleeping in a tiny bed next to the arguably creepiest damn clown in the universe. I threw the covers back and was about to swing my legs over the side of the bed when I heard it again. "You're not Luke." I froze in place. There was no denying it this time. I had heard a voice coming from the closet. Slowly, as if I didn't really want to see, I dragged my gaze towards a dark closet in the corner. From the red glow of the nightlight, I saw a tiny, pale face. Only the top half of the face was visible. Large, dark orbs for eyes, a greyish-white forehead, and a matting of dark hair. The face stared at me from high up in the closet, like it was some obscenely tall child standing just behind the wall. "What the hell? Who are you?" I stammered. The face remained still. I realized the eyes had not yet blinked. "Are you Reggie?" I asked. At the sound of the name, the face abruptly disappeared, and I heard a scrambling noise come from the closet. "Where is Luke?" The voice was louder and coarser this time, with Luke's name coming out gravelly and angry from the child. "He's not here," I said, glad to hear my voice steady this time. "What do you want?" There was silence for several seconds. Finally, the voice spoke, softer this time. "Want Luke." I was shocked into silence for a few beats. "You can't have Luke." The room suddenly grew cold and the air crackled. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Before I could say anything in response, I spotted movement at the floor of the closet. The white face was back, and I could see it more clearly from this vantage. It was the face of a child, but corrupted. This was not a child. The skin was sickly and thin. The eyes were sunken, almost desiccated. Dark circles surrounded the black eyes. The lips were pale and bloodless and were curled into a sickening grin. It was the teeth that shook me the most. They were extremely small, thin and jagged, as if each tooth had been broken intentionally to create this horrific and serrated maw. The chin rested directly on the floor, and the face looked directly at me with an anger I had never seen on the face of a child. It was a face of pure and utter rage. The face stared for a few seconds before the charred creature began to move. No, not move. It slithered. With its limbs tightly by its body, it slithered on its belly from the closet, all the while whispering in an increasingly sibilant voice. "Want Luke. Want Luke." I backed up as far as I could until I was pressed against the headboard of Luke's tiny bed while the child snaked itself forward. Soon the head and shoulders were no longer visible. I soon lost sight of its pointed white feet as it continued to glide lithely forward. The child was under the bed. I gripped the small mattress with both hands, not knowing what to do. My heart rate was through the roof and beads of sweat had welled up on my forehead. The mattress jostled as the creature underneath grabbed onto the springs from below, as if it was some deranged bat. The springs of the tiny mattress groaned from the extra weight. Slowly, I could feel the movement of the creature as it moved one hand, and then the other, until I could finally see tiny, jagged fingernails appear on the side of the bed. I've never understood the term paralyzed with fright. I always imagined the face with a raging monster or axe murderer. I could easily find the willpower to get my ass in gear and move. But in this moment, the ability to move had absolutely abandoned me, and I was forced to watch in silent horror as the tiny, dead hand was joined by another. I shut my eyes tight together, unwilling to have that horrible impersonation of a child burned into my retinas. And it was then that I heard it. John, come back to bed. This is ridiculous." The lights clicked on, and as I finally regained the use of my muscles to turn my head and open my eyes, the visage of my wife came into view. "John, are you okay?" I stared at her for a beat before I whipped back around to the side of the bed where the hands had grasped the mattress only moments before. Nothing. I released a breath I hadn't even realized I was holding. "I'm fine," I croaked. "All fine." She looked towards me where I'd been staring, not seeing anything. She continued, "Come back to bed. I can't sleep without you. It gives me the creeps sleeping alone." She turned and left, her robe trailing behind her. I waited for a full minute, listening intently for any sound. All was quiet. Hesitantly, I lowered one foot and then the other to the floor. As I stood up, I fully expected to see a tiny, ragged hand reaching from below the darkness of the bed to grasp my ankle, but none came. I couldn't bring myself to look under the bed. The possibility of coming face to face with that hideous mockery of a child made me feel sick. Instead, I turned around, walked out the room, and shut the door behind me. Back in my own bedroom, with my wife sleeping peacefully beside me, I laid awake for hours, unable to get the face of the child from my mind. Unable to sleep with the fear that I would awake with those small, cold hands wrapping around my throat and that snake-like voice whispering in the darkness. I must have drifted off, because the next thing I knew, it was morning. Sunlight shone through the partially open blinds and birds chirped annoyingly outside the second-floor window. I rubbed the sleep from my eyes as I contemplated the prior evening. I could not let Luke stay in that room again, not with that thing there. No, I had to do something. I had to protect my son. I grabbed my laptop from where it lay, gathering dust under my nightstand. The damn thing took what felt like hours to load. When I was finally able to get the dinosaur up and running, I loaded up my web browser and began my research. How to get rid of ghosts. The cursor blinked rapidly as if mocking me. I quickly backspaced and typed DIY exorcism. Okay, that was worse. Cleansing spirits from your house. That was better. I hit enter. The results were mixed, as was to be expected, but I finally found a few websites that gave me the information I needed. A few hours later, I had a plan, and I had a name. Reginald Ward. The little creature was named Reginald after all. It appears that unbeknownst to me and my wife, our home had been the scene of a tragic death of an 8-year-old boy in 1907. Reginald Ward, according to what I found online, had passed away from consumption, or tuberculosis as it's more commonly referred to these days. As distressed as I was to learn that our new home was the scene of a horrific death of a child, I was even more distressed that said child was still in residence. I shuddered to think about what had befallen that child over the past decades to turn it into this thing. My wife poked her head in the doorway, startling me out of my thoughts. "What are you doing? You've been in here all morning." "Nothing," I hedged, slowly closing the laptop screen so as to not make it suspicious. "Just looking at stuff online." "Okay." She drew out the word while giving me an odd look. Yep, she was definitely suspicious. I had to think quickly. "Hey, you've seemed really stressed lately. What if I had my mom keep Luke for another few hours and you had a spa day?" Her brows perked up. "Seriously? I thought you said that spa days were the most useless way to spend your money." My smile was tight. It was true. I thought it was an entire waste of money. You literally got nothing out of it. But I had to get her out of the house somehow. She couldn't be here if I was performing the cleansing. Nonsense, you deserve it. Go ahead, give them a call and set it up. She couldn't help the grin that spread across her face. You don't have to twist my arm, she yelled as she turned and scurried downstairs to make the call. I stopped myself from mentally tallying how much this little outing would cost me and focused my attention back on the task at hand. I felt like I had a pretty good idea on how to get rid of Reggie. From what I read online, it was better to do the cleansing at night, but I didn't have that sort of time. I had to deal with this now. I made a quick call to my mom to see if she could keep Luke until that evening. After coordinating the time that she could drop him off, I quickly dressed and hurried downstairs. Babe, I've got to run a few errands. I'll be back in a bit. Okay, I'm headed to the spa in a half hour. They had a cancellation for the deluxe package at the last minute. Isn't that great? I mentally groaned, but pasted a smile on my tense face. That's great, honey. Have fun. I grabbed my keys and hurried out to my car. 45 minutes later, I walked back into the house carrying my assorted purchases. Claire's car was gone, so I didn't bother calling out for her. I was all alone. Well, not alone exactly. I carried my purchases upstairs and opened the door to Luke's room. The red curtains were drawn and the room seemed just as creepy as the night before. The day had turned rainy and dreary, so what little light came through the curtains gave the room that same dim glow as the previous night. I shuddered. Shutting the door, I emptied the bag of items on the floor. I paused to take stock of my haul. A small, wrapped bundle of sticks I was told was called a sage smudging wand, an abalone shell, a large feather, a container of coarse salt, and a Bible. I pulled up my phone and found the article I'd been referencing earlier. I quickly reread the instructions through, just to be sure I had everything correct. I first grabbed the salt and sprinkled the line across the bedroom door. This was supposed to prevent the spirit from going into another part of the house during the cleansing. I didn't know if this would do anything, but I wasn't taking any chances. Next, I placed the abalone shell on top of the Bible. The Bible wasn't specifically in the instructions, but I figured it certainly couldn't help. Again, I was taking no chances. I walked over to the window and pulled back the red curtain. The rain was really coming down now. I opened the window slightly. The purpose of this, I had learned during my hurried research, was to give the spirit a pathway to leave the house. I didn't want to get rainwater all over my son's bedroom floor, so I only opened it a smidge. That should hopefully be enough. I pulled out a small lighter from my pocket and flicked it on. The small flame wavered in the semi-darkness of the small room. I picked up the smudge wand and lit the end. Red embers glowed as the stick caught fire. I quickly blew the open flame out, but the end of the smudge wand continued to slowly smoulder, the red embers causing a fragrant, earthy smoke to emit from the end. I quickly dropped the smouldering stick onto the abalone shell and picked it up along with the Bible. With my other hand, I grabbed the large feather. I was ready. I began to circle the room. With each step, I would use the feather to waft the smoke blanketing the room in that thick, earthy smell. I continued to circle the room twice more, keeping silent as I wafted the smoke permeating the room. After 3 rounds, I spoke. Reggie Ward, I command you in the name of God to leave this place. You are not welcome here and you must leave. I paused momentarily in my path. Nothing happened. I continued again. Reggie Ward, I command you in the name of God to leave this place. You are not welcome here and you must leave. Still, nothing. I started walking again. Reggie Ward, in the name of God, I command you to leave. At first, I thought there would still be no change. Slowly, I began to realize that there had, in fact, been a shift. I could no longer hear the rain. It was as if a thick layer of cotton had encased the room. The air was heavy and dense. I almost had the feeling of being underwater. I could hear my heartbeat increase. "Reggie, in the name of God, I command you to leave." On the word leave, I heard a thump from the closet. I paused in my pacing and stared over at the closet. The door was slightly ajar. Thick darkness enveloped the inside of the small closet. Without removing my eyes from the door, I started again. "Reggie, I command you in the name of God to leave this place." Another thump. And then, so low I could barely hear it, a hissing sound, not unlike breath whistling from between clenched teeth. A deep, long scratching shortly joined the hissing. "Reggie, I command you in the name of God to leave. You are not welcome here." The hissing became louder, and from the depths of the dark closet, a small, moaning voice. "Don't." The word was dragged out in a hissing rasp. "Reggie, you must leave now," I yelled towards the closet. "Don't." The hissing, raspy breath was louder this time. From the darkness of the closet, those two horrible, small grey hands emerged and clasping onto the doorframe. "John." The sound of my name in that sibilant tongue literally made my skin crawl. "John, don't." I did not comply. "Reggie Ward, in the name of God, I command you to flee this house." The top of the small, grey face joined the hands. The dark eyes had a wary look. I could have almost felt sorry for the creature, but I did not. Quieter this time, I again spoke. "Reggie, you must leave." Wisps of smoke began to emerge from the small hands, as if there was some great internal flame churning just beneath the skin. The entity did not appear to be able to speak any longer. Only that ragged, shrill hiss filled the air. I watched with trepidation as the hands fell abruptly to the ground. I could see sharp nails gouging crescents into the wood floors as it laboriously began to drag its body forward out of the darkness of the closet. In the light of the storm, and in its weakened state, the creature was pitiful. Grey, mottled skin rippled as the smoke drifted almost casually from its surface. The thing lifted its large black eyes to me in supplication. With great effort, it spoke. "Don't." I did not have a chance to respond. The smoke enveloped the creature. It swept silently through the open window. I stood still for several seconds before my knees finally gave out. I had not even realized the toll the process had taken on me until this very moment. I wiped a thin layer of perspiration from my brow as I looked towards the empty closet. It was over. Later that evening, my wife and I sat on the couch, each nursing a glass of white wine. I had not said much after she got home, and she, relaxed and zenned out after a day of pampering, had not pressed. I had not fully processed all that had happened within the last 24 hours. Honestly, I wasn't sure I ever would process it, but to know my son was now safe was solace enough for me. I took a large swig of the sweet wine and leaned back into the soft sofa. The doorbell rang, and before I could even set down my glass, the hurried footfalls of my son rushing through the front hallway reached my ears. "Dad! Mom!" Luke rushed into the living room and launched himself at us. Chuckling, we hugged the rambunctious boy as he told us about his adventures with Grandma. He was talking so fast, I could only make out every third word. From what I could tell, they had had a boatload of fun making cookies, playing games, and eating lots and lots of junk food. My mom entered the room at a more sedate pace. "Sheesh, Luke, let them breathe, bud," she intoned. "I'm going to go see Reggie. I can't wait to tell him about the new puzzle Grandma got me." Before I could say anything, he was already bounding up the stairs and giggling with excitement. My mom shook her head. He could not stop talking about his friend Reggie all weekend. She sat down on the edge of a chair next to the couch where Claire and I still lounged. Well, I have a feeling we won't need to worry about Reggie anymore, I said. My wife gave me a sideways, curious glance, but I ignored it. It was the strangest thing, though, my mother continued without acknowledging my statement. When I asked him about Reggie, he said he was dead. I know, said Claire. Rather creepy, isn't it? Yes, my mother agreed. I thought so as well. But he said that he was his friend and that Reggie protected him from the others. My gaze shot to my mum. What did you say? Yeah, it kind of creeped me out too, she said. He said that the others that lived in the attic were mean and tried to come down and hurt Luke. He said that Reggie wouldn't let them, that he protected him and kept him safe. When I tried to press him on it, he clammed up. A cold chill swept over my body. The others? Suddenly, the rasping voice of Reggie came back to me. Want Luke, want Luke. It was as if the floodgates opened in that moment, and I fully understood. Reggie didn't want Luke. He was trying to tell me they wanted Luke. The others wanted Luke. Reggie had been trying to warn me. He had tried to scare me into leaving. He had tried to help me, to protect my son. I quickly set down my wine glass and snatched the blanket off my legs. Before I could stand up fully, the sound of my son's screams met my ears.